So we just got this season, perhaps series finale for the Acolyte. Let's discuss it, including a cameo appearance from two major characters, one of which I think is generating the more interesting discussion. So, full spoilers, of course, for the Acolyte Episode 8, but let's get into it and let's cut the nonsense and get right to that moment. When Osha and Chimere are leaving their planet, we see in Chimere's goon cave a mysterious and quite evil-looking figure adorned by a cloak and just briefly watching them leave the planet. So, who was this? Was this Darth Plagueis as mentioned by Palpatine in Revenge of the Sith? Well, yes, it probably was. In Star Wars Legends, Darth Plagueis was the Sith Master of Palpatine, a detail which has been brought over to canon. He was a Mune, like Sandhill of the Banking Clan, and, well, he looked pretty much exactly like the creature we saw in today's episode. Now, are there some discrepancies? Yeah. In Legends, Plagueis would technically not have been born by this point, but that's not really a concern because we don't have his canonical birth date, and Plagueis in the expanded universe was obsessed with longevity and rejuvenating himself, so adding 50 years to his life, it's really not a concern whatsoever. Now, you'll note they didn't name Plagueis here, but Leslie Headland is clearly well-read when it comes to Star Wars lore. So this was obviously meant to be Plagueis. He's got that elongated head, the spindly fingers, it all matches up. I think they simply kept him more or less obscured in order to preserve freedom when they portray him for any sort of future media. Will he always look this evil? I mean, probably not. I think Plagueis looked like this simply to signify to the audience, especially the general audience, that this character who's only going to appear briefly and never again is evil as well, but Plagueis very well could still take his role as Hugo de Mosque from Star Wars Legends, where he blends in and rubs shoulders with the wealthy of the galaxy. But what's going on in this scene? Well, I actually think it's pretty obvious. And again, Leslie Headland is not forgetting about the rule of two. We see this individual who appears to be a Darksider, we see Chimere, the Stranger, and we see the Acolyte at the end, Osha. Leslie Headland stated before the series released that one of the things she wanted to explore was how an apprentice could eventually overcome the power of their master, sometimes with the help of an acolyte. So here's how I read the situation. Chimere thinks he's being sneaky. He's far off on some distant planet in the galaxy. He's working with his own apprentice, his own acolyte. He thinks he's creating a power which he can use to surpass his own master. However, this scene shows us that no, he's not nearly as slick as he thinks. We see that Plagueis is being sneaky. He's clearly trying to stay to the shadows, and that's because he does not want his apprentice to know that he's in on the gig. And I mean, I assume that Chimere is his apprentice. It's still very possible that he's not, that he's a Darksider but not a Sith. For right now, though, it doesn't really matter. Either way, he's on Plagueis' radar, and if his goal is eventually to surpass his master, well, we know he's not successful because Plagueis does get another apprentice, Palpatine. It would be Palpatine who would finally beat the old Mune, however you say that species. Those are just my thoughts, though I definitely wanted to see more of Plagueis and perhaps his own master Tenebrous in this time period, but I think the message was that what's actually going on with the Sith isn't the most important because they're not making their final strike here. We know that happens during the prequels. Rather, they're taking advantage of mistakes made by the Jedi to at least slightly further their grand plan. There's something going on with the Virgins and Osha and May, presumably Plagueis, who again is obsessed with longevity and the creation of life, learns something from them, but a lot of that is still up in the air, and I will say this season did do a good job for all of its issues of dealing with plot elements which people assumed would be holes. For example, everyone thought, well, the Jedi are aware of the Sith, but no, turns out when you watch to episode 8 of an 8-episode series, they can come up with some pretty convincing ideas. Sol was an extremely tragic character. He was my favorite in the show by far, the best acted, the most compelling. I love how small mistakes basically transformed his life in an extremely negative way. We can see how his Jedi training both helped and in key moments failed him. And I thought it was very interesting how Vernestra basically paints the failings of the Jedi as falling solely on Master Saul. And of course, that's not completely true. I was surprised by how much this episode hinted at future plot lines. I don't know whether there's going to be a season 2, but I predicted in episode 6 that there was more going on between Vernestra and Chimera. I didn't think it was a mistake that Vernestra used her light whip to kill a bug. She was clearly showing it off to the audience, and Chimera was also clearly showing off his back, which, by the way, had a whip-like scar on it. The two had some pre-existing relationship, and we've now learned that Chimera was the pupil of Vernestra. There's something weird going on there with his age. He implied to Osha that he's older than he appears. I'm not exactly sure, but he certainly had interactions with Vernestra, and Vernestra is now hunting him down. What's interesting is that she doesn't realize that he's a Sith Lord. I think she thinks he's just another fallen Jedi, and she's hiding this from the rest of the Council because the Republic's scrutiny is on the Jedi Order. But if Saul were around, he'd probably be able to testify to Chimera's pure power, which maybe would be an indication that, no, he's something more than just a fallen Jedi apprentice. I enjoyed the duel between Chimera and Saul. I enjoyed the general themes of this episode and really of this season as a whole. I like, again, and I mentioned this, that they got around what many people saw as plot holes. Another was regarding the training of Osha. Anakin was supposed to be the first to be too old, but we now learn that the Council didn't really make an exceptional status exception for Osha. She just had such a sad story. They let her in, and she ended up failing anyway. But yeah, while these plots and the general lore I thought for the season was well handled, the direction, the choice of how to frame the story and more, that's where the Acolyte Season 1 really fell flat for me. And to put it simply, I do not care about May and Osha, and that is a major failing for a show which wants to be about the story of May and Osha more than the far more compelling Sith who are operating in the background. The show, which was too short and too focused on flashbacks, just did not establish why I should care about the current iteration of these characters. The flashbacks, they solved some mysteries, but we didn't spend enough time with May and Osha for me to really care about who falls to the dark side and who goes to the light side. And it's just really hard to look past that failure of the show. The episodes are too short, there were not enough of them, and many episodes also had issue with directing. This one was mostly good, but I think back to, for example, the fight scene and some issues with the choreography that I pointed out there in episode 4 or 5, whichever one. So overall, I think an okay ending to an okay series. I didn't hate this one like a lot of people did. I was looking forward to each episode mostly because of the revelation for the Sith, but I think in hindsight, I'll see it as a show which had some really interesting ideas about the Jedi and how individuals could fail the Jedi Order, but was also a show ultimately held back by its own lack of execution. If there is a season 2, I'll definitely watch it and talk about it for the channel, but if there's not, at this point, I also kind of accept it and understand it. Let me know your thoughts on all this and more, whether you liked the episode, whether any of the reveals got you excited, of course, down below. See you next time. May the Force be with you.